And so going back to MLK Jr.'s article on the purpose of education and my argument about its relevancy today, the reason that race and inequality continue to persist and be an issue, and I know some will frame me to be a radical anti-government anarchist, but that's certainly not the case. I believe in the essential role of a government in a democratic society. I just believe that relatively speaking, it should be much, much smaller. My problem is with the lack of substance backing up these initiatives and how wasteful it is to pay some suit to sit downtown to make a slideshow and come up with a new curriculum with some fancy new catchphrase when I do this every single day, when we do this every single day. Hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption, disrupting the status quo of public education. And it is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So I know definitely the teachers and students are off, and probably a bunch of the rest of you guys too. So I hope you're enjoying your extra day, your long weekend. And I also think that it's important for us to keep in mind why we have this day off, who we're celebrating, and what the legacy of MLK can teach us today. And so I was searching on the internet, looking through some speeches and articles and things that he wrote, and I came across his article, The Purpose of Education. So I'm going to go ahead and read that article and just give some of my thoughts and feelings about what that means for education today. But before we get into it, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with all your friends to support the channel. And of course, anything that I reference, articles, websites, all the links are in the description down below. But let's get into it. So you can see the purpose of education, February 1947. And so this was a young Martin Luther King Jr., and he wrote this for his college campus newspaper. So let's go ahead and check it out. As I engage in the so-called bull sessions around and about the school, I too often find that most college men have a misconception of the purpose of education. Most of the brethren think that education should equip them with the proper instruments of exploitation so that they can forever trample upon over the masses. Still others think that education should furnish them with noble ends rather than means to an end. It seems to me that education has a twofold function to perform in the life of man and in society. The one is utility, and the other is culture. Education must enable a man to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of his life. Education must also train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. At this point, I often wonder whether or not education is fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit in many instances do not give us objective and unbiased truths. To save man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals. The late Eugene Talmadge, in my opinion, possessed one of the better minds of Georgia, or even America. Moreover, he wore the Phi Beta Kappa key. By all measuring rods, Mr. Talmage could think critically and intensively. Yet he contends that I am an inferior being. Are those the types of men we call educated? We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objects upon which to concentrate. The broad education will, therefore, transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living. If we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists consumed with immoral acts. Be careful, brethren. Be careful, teachers. And so what I noticed as I was reading this is that very little has changed between 1947 and today. The situation is very analogous. All of the issues on the forefront of education are related to race and socioeconomic inequality and or to the battle between the what, right? The transmission of facts and information versus the how, right? The application of facts and information that are both culturally relevant and morally desirable. And so I would argue that these issues are inherently connected by the tyranny of an oversized federal government that's been given too much power over our classrooms, over our teachers, and over what's taught in them. And while many who claim to be progressive look to the creation of more government policy and more government agencies to enact such policies as the solution, I would argue it has been the tyranny of federal and state and even of local power that legally reinforced and systemized first slavery and then racism, and still today the realities that we're dealing with. So in other words, slavery and racism and all of the inequalities persist precisely because of government and not despite them. And if you don't believe me, let's look at the money. Because it's always about the money. Slavery and racism and other limitations on people's freedoms are economically disadvantageous. They may enrich a few, but overall, it is not a system that is good for a country. And once slavery and Jim Crow ended, we saw economic opportunity increase, particularly in the South. And so, logically that makes sense, right? When people are more free, they're free to make decisions, and people like to get rich, so they make decisions to get rich. And that's not to say, again, just because those, slavery ended or Jim Crow ended, that everybody's perfectly equal and those economic opportunities were spread equally. But again, those inequalities that persist, that gap that persists, whether it's economically or in education, it's not despite government action. It is because of what the government does and the policies they enact and continue to enact. So again, let's just quickly look at a couple studies that kind of show this relationship between the ending of slavery and the ending of Jim Crow and the increase of economic output and economic efficiency in America. So there's this one article right here, Ending Slavery Made America Richer, and he goes through and he breaks it down by looking at this chart, and he explains how there are common misconceptions, or it's commonly stated that, America got rich off of slavery, but while yes, some did get rich, right? And again, there's another article, they say this, an Economist article, slavery worked for a few slave owners, but very few others. And so going back to MLK Jr.'s article on the purpose of education and my argument about its relevancy today, the reason that race and inequality continue to persist and be an issue is, and that we're forced to, cram our students full of information, is due to oversized federal, state, and local government power in determining the quality and the content and how and what we do in our classrooms, right? It's the government policies and how our schools are funded that have ingrained this systematic segregation, systematic inequality into our system. It's the government policies around accountability and data and testing that have forced us to focus more on the transmission of information and knowledge rather than on the moral character of the pupils into which we are putting that knowledge. And yet, we continue to look to these same government institutions that created this reality we live every day, to the people who enact this policy. But they don't know the realities of what we experience because it's us, it's the teachers, the administrators, the staff that are charged with implementing what are ultimately substanceless policies, right? That have nice sounding names but don't actually mean anything tangible, except that I have to make sure that the numbers look a certain way so that they can hit their arbitrary targets that they link to, the percentage of academic proficiency in this or the racial diversity in that or blah, 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 whatever, they look good in their suit and sound nice at their press release. But when I look at my Instagram or I look at my Twitter or my LinkedIn or my YouTube subscriptions I have of teachers, I see real people, real educators, real kids, doing real things, making tangible changes in their classrooms and in their schools and in the lives of their students. And it's not because of some policy initiative, but it's usually in spite of that initiative because that's what we do, right? We know what it takes to meet the needs of our kids in a way that the government or some bureaucrat simply doesn't. And so, take for example, the latest propaganda, the latest policy initiative that they're pushing in New York City. So it started in 2015 under the previous Chancellor Carmen Farina, and it's continued under the more recently appointed Chancellor Richard Carranza. And it's called Equity and Excellence for All. Sounds nice. So in this policy, it says here on the website, the New York City Department of Education is committed to providing every single child in every classroom in every New York City public school with a rigorous, inspiring, and nurturing learning experience. That is true regardless of family income, race, nationality, disability, language spoken at home, sexual orientation, or gender identification. All right, so again, sounds really nice. I'm pretty much on board with that. And to fulfill this commitment, they are doing things such as 3K and pre-K. They're extending early literacy programs, offering more courses on computer science, algebra, AP, college access. And now again, the actual initiatives themselves, I don't necessarily have any problems with. The language of the policy, I think we can all broadly agree with its tenets and that they align with our mission as educators. But rather, my problem is with the lack of substance backing up these initiatives and how wasteful it is to pay some suit to sit downtown to make a slideshow and come up with a new curriculum with some fancy new catchphrase when I do this every single day, when we do this every single day. And they probably haven't been in a classroom implementing instruction in years, if not longer, right? What we do need is not another policy initiative, not another slideshow. We need funding. And we need the freedom and autonomy to use that funding the ways that we best know serve the needs of our students. And I am going to give credit where credit is due. I can't speak to the quality of the program, but I am a huge proponent of universal pre-K. I think those 2 years early on are the most important years. They're the foundations of literacy, of numeracy, and of those social interactions that kids are going to carry on with them. And so I really commend New York City for taking this action. And I look forward to in a few years when that first class of kids is coming up to, second and third grade, where we know that data is really decisive in showing the gap. And that gap in second and third grade generally persists and is reflective of graduation rates then later on. So I do support that one, but nearly every single other one of those initiatives, the AP classes, the algebra, those should all be being done on a school by school level. I mean, the principals know and the teachers know what their students need. So cut out the middleman, cut out all the red tape, and pass on all that money, including the savings from those hundreds of thousands of dollars you're spending on the bureaucrats, to the schools. I mean, let's just look at the waste from some of these policy initiatives that come along with the equity and excellence for all. So they're spending $23 million on anti-bias training. So again, it sounds nice. We should be anti-bias. Yes. Right? So right here, you can see Daily News, $23 million for anti-bias training for public school educators. And they go on to describe that there's some disagreements about what's in there and but regardless, the point is that $23 million for a slideshow that teachers have to fulfill on one day. I mean, we actually haven't done it yet at my school. We're set to do it in 1 week. I just got my email. But again, it's a slide, has different presentations. It's a slideshow, and it's like, what does that really do in terms of substantive and actionable change that for the issues that I face on a daily basis as a teacher? Just take that $23 million and give it directly to the schools. The waste is just unbelievable. I could do a whole video on Carranza and his cronies and all of the stuff surrounding that, but let's just take a look at some of the bloat and some of the crazy salary increases that have come along with the Carranza chancellorship. So you can see right here, Department of Education to spend $2.5 million per year on executive superintendents. So superintendents weren't enough. We have to have executive ones. And so they're creating 9 new positions that'll cost $2.5 million, which is at least $190,000 in salary. $190,000 salary. I mean, that's over 2 teachers, depending on how much experience they have. And then that doesn't even, $82,000 on benefits, right? And then right here, these are different positions, but their salary increases are crazy. We're seeing 20% salary increases for some of these people. And their salaries were not small before. We're talking making almost $200,000, or in some cases over, and now they're making $240,000, $230,000, $220,000. It's like ridiculous, right? What do these people do? Who are they? They don't make any difference in what I do, I'll tell you that. Right? And then there's other things about Carranza and different corruption scandals that he may do. Let me know if you want to see a video about that, actually. Thus, even the most reasoned and morally righteous laws must be made real by what we do. And while politicians can look real good in front of the camera saying nice things we can all agree with, it is left to us to make the 2 ends meet of a string that's several feet too short and fraying at different places along the way. This is the same sentiment that King expressed in a speech to commemorate the Emancipation Proclamation. He said, "The proclamation of inferiority has contended with the proclamation of emancipation, negating the liberating force. So we let the slaves free, but the day-to-day reality was they were treated as second-class citizens, as inferior. So say what you will in that nice-sounding policy, but it's not real." And he goes on to explain that then the only way to truly commemorate the Emancipation Proclamation is to make its declaration of freedom real, to reach back to the origins of our nation when the message of equality electrified an unfree world and reaffirmed democracy by deeds as bold and daring as the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Likewise, we have to be daring. Teachers and students and parents, we have to be daring to fight against the corruptive power of the ever-expanding federal and state and local governments that use their positions to protect their own power rather than to serve the needs and interests of the people. And I know some will frame me to be a radical anti-government anarchist, but that's certainly not the case. I believe in the essential role of a government in a democratic society. I just believe that, relatively speaking, it should be much, much smaller to maintain that proper balance between the maintenance of the system itself and the interest of the people it serves. And currently, it is far, far, far too big and too interested in conserving itself to be interested in all of what the people want. So let us know in those comments down below, what are you thinking? How is MLK's legacy still relevant to you today, whether that's specifically within an education context or more generally speaking? And then I want to know, what do you think is the appropriate relationship between government, whether it be federal or state or local, and individual schools? To what extent should they determine what and how kids are learning, what the graduation requirements are, and all of those standardized tests? And then finally, I want to know, what's the situation in your district and at your school? So let us know. I definitely think that this is an important conversation and definitely one of the keys to empowering teachers to reframe their position within education and education policy, and really creating that transformation that we so need in education. So again, if you enjoyed this video, definitely like, subscribe so that you get notifications to all my videos. And again, we want to know what you're thinking. This is a conversation, it's a community. So let us know in those comments down below. And you already know what it is, guys. Stay foolish, y'all.